the Market Musings podcast.
Hi, welcome to Stopbox. I'm Pam Sidhu. And of course, it's time for our Market Musings podcast. Now, we like to bring you different content each week. And this week, we're joined by David Lenigas, the chairman of Vinanz Limited. How are you doing, David?
Yeah, hi, Pam. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you. The sun's shining. It's looking like it's a nice day today. Anyway, the day that we're recording.
Well, in England yesterday, it was a nice sunny day, but where I am in England, before I head off on my next flight tomorrow, it's turned miserable and cloudy. But I'm happy because the Bitcoin price is now $68,500.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's move on to that because we are here to pick your brains about all things Bitcoin. But let's just go back, first of all, David. Let's go back to you. Tell us about your background. I mean, of course, you've had many businesses, but growing up, was your family in business? Do you come from a business background?
No, my father owned a corner shop in the middle of Australia. He was a person who moved from Europe to Australia after the Second World War and played in jazz bands and ran corner shops. So, I mean, most of my life growing up was living behind a corner shop while I was going through primary school and secondary school. Yeah, Dad was a businessman. He worked 3 jobs to put 3 of us through private school at the same time. So I appreciate all the work he put in. Sadly, he's passed away, and hopefully he's having a good rest. But no, I spent my formative years in a little town called Paroona in the middle of South Australia with a population of about 5. So I'm sort of the ultimate bush boy. So chasing snakes and living in a little corner shop environment. My father was the guy who owned the general store. We had 1 train a week. He had the post office. He was the grader driver. He was the rabbit shooter, and the general store owner and the postmaster general for the town.
It's funny because I've got a very background. So my parents, of course, the Indian heritage I've got, they moved over from India to England and they bought a shop. I grew up in a shop. They had a corner shop, and it taught me many principles of being self-employed, working for yourself and making your business work. So just listening to you tell your story there and tell your background, I'm sure that gave you the foundation for what you're doing today.
If you don't work, you don't eat.
Yeah.
Bottom line. And no handouts in our family. We all had to work for it. So I think that sort of taught me a lot about the concept that, we don't know anybody a living. You've got to crack on. Life's tough. Mental illness, they talk about a lot of mental illness these days. I call it life's tough.
Yeah.
So get on with it. Obviously some people suffer from very severe sort of illnesses mentally, but I think a lot of the mental illness that's going around is just grow a backbone and get on with life. Try and get away with all that sort of stuff in India or Africa these days. I tell you to go and do something, make yourself busy.
Yeah, yeah. So did you always want to be in business, David, like having grown up in that background?
I didn't know what I wanted to do. I mean, when I finished high school, I got pretty good results because, you put your back in it and get some pretty good results. So I could have been pretty much anything except a doctor, I think, from a university perspective. And I looked at sort of the curriculum and what was around and thought, well, what degree could I do in the quickest possible time and earn the most amount of money? And the easiest. And mining engineering sort of stuck out as something I wanted to sort of go and look at pursuing. And it didn't quite work out that way because I studied full-time, part-time, full-time, part-time. It took me about 10 years to get my degree, even though it was supposed to take 3, if I did it as a dedicated student. Yeah. And in those days, in Australia, university education was free. It was the last year of my uni that they actually started charging university students for university courses. So I was pretty lucky that, even though it took me 10 years to get my degree and I did 3 times as many subjects as I probably needed to, I graduated and I also had a lot of work experience.
Yeah.
So I was never poor while I was a student. I mean,
Yeah.
I was an underground miner. I worked for the government. I worked for the mines department. I was an underground machine miner. I made a lot of money. I mean, I was very, very highly paid.
Yeah, and that's the thing, isn't it? Because there's a lot of people that may come out of university with a degree, but they have zero work experience. So it sounds like you've done the two simultaneously together.
Well, I was lucky in that sense, yeah, and I don't regret any of the time. I mean, I said it took me 10 years to get my degree pretty much. And when I graduated with a first-class mine manager's certificate because I'd already had all of the experience. I passed all the exams, I passed all the tickets. And my first job in the mining industry of proper, apart from being an underground labourer, machine miner, truck driver, jumbo operator, et cetera, was working in Fiji. So, at the ripe old age of sort of, what was I, about 28 or something, I went to Fiji and worked at the Emperor Gold Mine in Fiji and sort of went, that was really the beginning of my corporate life. I enjoyed it. I spent 4 years there. Emperor was one of the really big companies listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. Yeah. We had operations all the way around the world, and very quickly I went into management, and that's never sort of went away, I suppose.
Yeah.
And here I am.
Yeah, here you are today. And well, you have a metals mining background. So how did you transition into Bitcoin? I suppose mining is mining, right?
Could you just ask that again, Pam? You broke up for a sec.
So you have a metals mining background. How did you transition into Bitcoin? I suppose mining.
Yeah, no, I think it's more fundamental than that, Pam. It's about, I've got a metals and mining degree, and most of my business has been nothing to do with metals and mining. Yeah. I think metals and mining degree actually taught me how to run business and how to be disciplined with respect to business. And all business is a big widget factory. And I think I'm very good at building and selling and promoting and running good widgets. So Bitcoin mining, I find the whole thing quite amusing. A mining engineer turning into a Bitcoin miner is really quite extraordinary. But it's the same principles. You've got the same inputs. You've got electricity. You've got people. You've got product. I've got to sell a product. People want to buy Bitcoin. Just as if you're running a gold mine, people will buy your gold. You've got to sell it in the right way, to the right markets, to the right people, the right price. And if you make money, you grow a business. Bitcoin's exactly the same. We have computers, we have people, we have electricity costs, we have government taxation, and we produce a nice product called Bitcoin. And well, luckily, the world loves to buy it.
I find this fascinating because it's the similar principles of mining, whether you're mining out of the ground or whether you're mining digitally. But, let's pick your brains, David, on the whole market there. So it's been said that retail investors have been less interested in metals, mining stocks during times of turmoil. And most of all, the liquidity has moved to crypto. How true do you think this is?
I don't quite get the question, Pam.
So it's been said that retail investors have been less interested in metals, mining stocks during times of turmoil, right? So in times of turmoil, traditionally people would, go for, traditional metals, buying gold.
Well, they are, Pam. I mean, look at, okay, you've got things like,
but now
you've got things like copper and gold and nickel and all those things which sort of move up and down with respect to world supply and demand. But look at the gold price. Gold is now at a record high. I mean, now in Aussie dollar terms, $1,000 an ounce. I remember when I was working and running the Emperor Gold Mines in Fiji, in the 1980s to 1990s, the gold price was $340 an ounce. So people are moving to gold in times of economic instability. Things like copper, lead, zinc, that's all supply and demand driven. It depends how much China's growing, how much America's growing, how much the world's going into growth or recession. So, it's all about bonds, gilts, gold, and now Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. So the market's changed, right? Because before it was traditional metals. Now, do you think there's a large chunk of that that's moving into crypto as well, into Bitcoin?
No, it's only just started. I mean, you say a large chunk. I mean, gold is trading in the trillions of dollars a month, type scenario on global derivative exchanges. Bitcoin is only really gathering its pace. The reason why I think Bitcoin's becoming really credible is, earlier this year, the SEC granted spot Bitcoin ETF status to a number of the big funds in America. And I read the other day that already the American institutions have bought $58 billion worth of Bitcoin. And that continues to rise as institutions start putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. I mean, Larry Fink, who's the head of BlackRock, I mean, he's famously been said, once they got their first ETF going, that Bitcoin to them is just another asset class, just like gold and just like silver. So, and fund managers like to diversify. So long as they've got liquidity, people will look at putting it in their portfolio. And last week, there was a very significant event in the States, which is very quietly sort of not talked about over here for some reason. But the US SEC granted option status for the Bitcoin ETFs in the States, which means that the big hedge funds and the big broking and the big banks over there can start putting derivatives against Bitcoin ETFs. That's going to see a whole lot more liquidity and interest in the Bitcoin sector. And not only America, you've got Australia's now got spot live ETFs, you've got Hong Kong spot live ETFs, there's other countries in Asia, you've got other countries in South America. England's not there yet for some reason. My job, and which is why I like this whole podcast thing, is educating Britain about Bitcoin. And I think there's a huge gap there that needs to be brought up to date.
Absolutely. And that's what this is all about as well, David. It's about picking your brains and educating ourselves on this subject. So a statement you made recently, you said, I'm a Bitcoin believer and can see it performing very well as the world's debt spirals out of control. Now, I've got to ask you about this, David. So what are the factors that you feel are near-term catalysts? Is it US debt, BRICS being the new currency, oil no longer to be paid in US dollars? Where does this fit in?
Right. So I remember when I was running Lonhro in the Lonhro days, sort of in the 2008, 9, 10 years. I'd drive into New York, be driving to Wall Street to go and see the bankers in Wall Street, and there's this big, constant changing number sign, big long scrolling sign on the way to Wall Street, and the US government debt was $17 trillion at the time. That was 12 to 14 years ago. You're now talking US government debt is in the $33 to $35 trillion. What is the concept of money? It's just a promissory note that one day some government's going to back you and pay you back. Look at the English debt. It's now over £2 trillion. For the first time in history, there is a currency out there called Bitcoin, which has a finite amount of product. All the other global currencies, governments just keep printing money. It's just a digital piece of paper. And you just hope like hell your government doesn't go broke. So it's a promissory note. Bitcoin is a fixed number. As I say, it's the first time in humankind's history there is a currency out there that there's only ever going to be so many of them, and that's 21 million. And at the moment there's about 19.6 million, and the world's currently being made available 450 Bitcoins a day. In about 4 years' time, it'll drop to about 225 Bitcoins a day. And then about 4 or 5 years after that, it'll drop to about, 120 Bitcoins a day and so on and so forth. But there will only ever be 21 million. And, and some of the really big guys in America in this space, they can see Bitcoin being $1 million purely on supply and demand. And the American government did a really smart thing with the SEC by legalizing ETFs, because the big conundrum for the world politicians is how do you tax people making money out of Bitcoin? The Italian government just came last week or the week before and said you're going to be taxed 42% on your Bitcoin profits. Fine, great. Go find where they are. The American government said we're going to allow spot ETFs. $58 billion has now been bought of Bitcoin, real Bitcoin, through spot ETFs, through the American marketplace, through the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, legal, and the government can sit there and go, I'm going to take my tax share on this. That was really smart. So the bigger it gets, the more tax generated. Trump, if he wins, I mean, I'm not saying, either way on this podcast who my feeling is, but I mean, I was listening to the head analyst at Standard Chartered last week. He said if Trump wins, he's talking about immediately sacking Geithner from the SEC, Bitcoin being part of the US growth model. You could see Bitcoin at 125,000 by the end of the year. If Kamala Harris wins, you could see Bitcoin at 75,000. Either way, every analyst in the world is calling Bitcoin up. I'm in the Bitcoin going to $1 million club. I just see that the more mainstream it becomes, the more people will want to hold a bit of it. The interesting thing is people don't know that I think the second largest holder of Bitcoin in the world is actually the US government. And within the top 5 is the Chinese government. I mean, there's a lot of big players in the Bitcoin space.
Yeah. So do you think, based on that, David, that Bitcoin has the real potential to become a future currency, or is it more likely to become a store of value?
Pam, it already is. If you've got a Revolut card, right, and there's 8.5 million Brits with Revolut, right? And Revolut's now going for a full banking license. In places around the world, it already has a full banking license. In Australia, it's got a full banking license. You can have a crypto account on your Revolut card and buy and sell Bitcoin and any other sort of many other types of cryptocurrency. But the one I have is principally Bitcoin. And I can move that from Bitcoin to multiple currencies and use it instantly. It's phenomenal. I mean, it's already being used. You can pay with taxis in many countries with Bitcoin now. You can pay Bitcoin. You can, there's a bar in New York called, what is it called? Beer, Burger, and Bitcoin. That's where Donald Trump famously a couple of weeks ago went and paid for a round of drinks and burgers at this bar in New York with Bitcoin on his wallet. I mean, it's already happening. People can start paying each other regularly now. Bitcoin. There's talk that if Trump gets in and Elon Musk gets the industry sort of job that's being touted, you'll be able to buy a Tesla with Bitcoin. It's happening. It's happening already.
So thanks for the macro picture. Now let's bring it back to your operations at Vinanz. So what makes your approach to mining at Vinanz so different? For example, what benefits of the decentralized model that you're using?
Right. Well, Jeremy Edelman and I, we've done a number of public companies in the past. Some very, very successful. I think Altona and Braymore in 2005 were within the top 7 best performing stocks in London that year. And I said to Jeremy, look, there's a real opportunity here to be another Bitcoin miner, but do it differently to Argo blockchain. And I think it needs to be in the UK. And we looked at all the pros and cons and said, okay, Argo was principally focused about building Bitcoin database centers, hosting their own stuff, having huge, database facilities in Texas, and the cycle went against them. Unfortunately, the world economy went. The Bitcoin price dropped to sub 20,000, and they went into huge amounts of debt, and they're still struggling to get out of it. So Jeremy and I said, okay, how can we create a Bitcoin mining company that minimizes the risks and maximize the gain and the leverage with respect to what the Bitcoin price can be, and gives retail hunters the ability to say, okay, rather than me owning a piece of Bitcoin or a piece of crypto, why don't I look at buying a bit of Binance, and that way I've got exposure to the Bitcoin miner through Binance.
Mm.
So we created this model. So that the model for us is to be debt-free, have multiple mining clusters throughout North America, and we just want North America. We want to keep it simple, stupid. You cannot mine Bitcoin in Europe. The power price is too expensive. You can't mine Bitcoin in Africa. Governments are too unstable, and so is telecommunications. You could look at doing it in Asia, but I'm not there. But America is where it's at. I mean, 70% of all crypto transactions are now through the United States. So you want to be in the home of where life's busy. So our model is multiple data centers, multiple hosting agents. I don't want to own a data center. I don't want 15 employees that are all waking up in the morning, whinging and screaming at each other, and this guy's just got divorced, and that guy's just, whatever, and all of a sudden you've got HR issues. I just want to pay someone to give me slot space, really good power prices, really good uptime, really good services that can put the miners, the Bitcoin mine in my wallet and manage my machine and have a great working relationship with me and my team. So we started as an operating company. We listed on Aquis originally because Aquis was an exchange that was receptive to a Bitcoin miner listing here in the UK. There was no chance of listing name, forget it. LSE books were closed since Argo. The government was still sort of formulating their ideas with respect to crypto. So we listed on Aquis and then sort of subsequently, dual traded on the OTC markets in the States. So our model, and at the moment we've got Bitcoin operation, our Bitcoin miners, computers operating in Labrador in Canada, Indiana, Iowa, Nebraska, and Texas. And each one of those has different hosting groups, different power prices, different expandability modes. And if you said to me, where do you want to be, Dave, in a year's time? I'd like to have 500 Bitcoin miners spinning in 50 different US and Canadian states. Each state will have different rules and regulations around crypto, around power prices, about tax, about whatever. So, or bushfires or snowstorms that take out the electricity grid and all that sort of stuff. So the more diversified I can be, the more I can de-risk the scenario for our investors and the company's ability to always generate Bitcoin. And by having fixed contracts with hosters, I know what my fixed prices for operating are. So at the moment, I know that at this Bitcoin price, pretty much everything we have in America and Canada is making us money. And we're on either 1, 2, or 3 year fixed price contracts that roll over. So the higher the Bitcoin price goes, the more delta on the profit that we make because our costs are pretty much fixed. We run the whole company with 3 people. We don't need much more than that. Now, Jeremy Edelman's over here in London at the moment, and we're talking about expansion, and what do we need to expand? We've got about 600 Bitcoin miners at the moment. I'd like to be looking at, can we get to 1,000 by Christmas time? If not by Christmas, soon after, what do we need to do there? And at what point do we need to start employing, techno geek number 1, techno geek number 2, so we can go around and kick the tires on all these computers that we're owning in America and Canada, to have a relationship more personal with our hosting groups. So I'd like to see that sometime next year we're punching in the thousands of Bitcoin miners with, probably 5 people working within the organization. Keep the costs low, profitability high, and gear up and look towards Bitcoin going to the hundreds to 2. I mean, who was it the other day? Van Eck. They were one of the first big ETFs in the States, spot Bitcoin. The CEO of Van Eck said about a month and a half ago that their modelling in this halving cycle of 4 years is calling Bitcoin to touch between 350,000 a coin to as high as potentially, on their modelling, one model has it up as high as potentially $2.9 million per Bitcoin in this cycle. in this halving cycle. And a halving cycle is about 4 years.
Yeah.
So right now we're at 68,500. Fantastic. You know, if you look at the Bitcoin price in the previous halving periods, it's gone anything from 8 to 20x. So if that model holds together, we're talking Bitcoin anything between $500,000 and a couple of $1 million in this next halving cycle. So our role is just to buy as many Bitcoin miners as we can, accumulate as much Bitcoin to our wallet, and make ourselves highly profitable as the Bitcoin price goes up. So that's our model. It's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Few staff, low overheads, and maximum exposure to the Bitcoin price.
Absolutely. Now, you also talk about the use of AI in your operations. How does that work?
Well, AI is starting to touch everybody in the world on everything we do. So it's sort of there's a big competition coming for rack space and power consumption and power demand between the Bitcoin sector and the AI sector. I mean, last week I read that Google's looking at putting in 7 nuclear reactors to fund its AI computer network. I know of groups in America that are being asked to turn off their Bitcoin miners from time to time to allow AI computers to effectively operate that rack space for those hours in the day at a much higher reward for the Bitcoin miners. So, you know, there's some competition for power and energy and rack space. That's life really interesting. So, you know, one of the other modes of expansion for us is to be in as many US states as we can with multiple hosting providers for our miners, that at some point when AI people go, I need some rack space, who do I go and talk to? Oh, I'll go and speak to Vinanz. They've got rack space in multiple US states. Maybe I can grab them and potentially expand those sectors and switch out their Bitcoin miners from my AI machine. So that we're trying to position ourselves that we're making ourselves attractive as a company for someone to buy us at some point in time.
Well, as you mentioned, AI is everywhere. It seems to be the future, and it sounds like you're ready for that as well. But just to finish off, David, I mean, of course, it's fascinating speaking to you, and I'm sure we will be speaking to you again, picking your brains on all things Bitcoin. But of course, you have given us some predictions there with Bitcoin. But just to bring it back to this one, some people have suggested that Bitcoin could go to 100K in the next 6 to 12 months. Do you think it's realistic? And what would the impact on your business be if this does happen?
I think it's very realistic. I mean, a lot of the big institutional fundies are calling Bitcoin to that and beyond. And if you look at history of what happens to Bitcoin, between halvings, if you look at the graph of where Bitcoin is at the moment, for the technical chartists, I think we're right on track for a bit of a breakout. Look, there's always a risk that crypto, like Bitcoin, goes up and down, and sometimes it can go down. It depends on how long a time frame you look at things, and we're a long Bitcoin company, so we're taking a longer term view. You've got views of some of the smartest bankers in the world, some of the biggest funds in the world, all calling Bitcoin a lot higher. Yeah, I mean, I'd love Bitcoin to be $100,000 in the coming 6 to 12 months. I think it'll go higher than that. But I mean, I'll take $100,000 a Bitcoin if that's what it's offering. What it does is it basically doubles our profit.
Yeah.
Because our operating costs are pretty low. It doubles our profit, and the more profit we make, the more money we can throw into buying more Bitcoin miners without potentially tapping up the markets for further equity raises. The higher the Bitcoin price goes, the more money we make and the more miners we can roll out in North America, bottom line.
Well, we'll be watching this space, David, and no doubt we'll be speaking to you again soon, following your journey as Vinanz, but also we'll be speaking to you again soon to pick your brains more on what is happening with the Bitcoin market. But thanks for taking this time.
My job, Pam, my job is to educate Britain about Bitcoin, and I'm very excited about that. I think there's a big information gap here, and someone needs to be doing it.
Well, we'll be speaking to you soon, David. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us today at Stockbox.
Great, thanks.